Superheroes, Star Wars, drones.
I think that's on. Hello, check. No, it's not on.
I think.
The other way?
Yeah, let me grab Kevin really quick.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So his power's off.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
It's probably gonna take like
Check. No. Okay.
Hey, Fred.
Check. No.
Oh, there you go. Cool.
All right.
Okay. I'll take the introduction.
Thank you.
So, good evening, everyone. This is our first lecture, second event here at Woodbury today. It's an honor to kind of invite Evan to come and give a talk about his work. I actually saw some of your work a while ago. I was trying to make the connection. So when Catherine actually asked to do, it took me a little bit of research. I was like, I'm so glad that you're here. So thanks for coming down. Evan Apodaca is a media artist known for his film Que Lejos Estoy, which streamed nationally on PBS in 2016. Apodaca received his Bachelor's of Fine Arts from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2009 and is currently based in San Diego, California. His work explores new forms of narrative nonfiction through methods of public engagement and innovative digital media interfaces. In 2018, he was the associate producer and animator for Singing My Way to Freedom, an award-winning feature film about musician and civil rights activist Ramon Chunky Sanchez. So, if you guys don't know about Chunky, he was probably one of the biggest figures in Barrio Logan and kind of one of the instigators for Chicano Park. And you would see him around the neighborhood all the time. So that's a big, thank you for doing that. That's a big deal.
The director of Paisanosa is actually here.
That's great.
And he's going to be on the air on November the 3rd on KPBS on November 3rd, 9 p.m. So check it out.
Perfect.
To see it.
Perfect, thank you. Apodaca's work consists of short films and video installations that examine themes of race, family history, culture assimilation, political activism, and most recently, militarism in the San Diego region. His films have also screened at the Chicano International Film Festival in LA, the Tijuana Film and Food Festival, and the San Diego Latino Film Festival. Apodaca was a 2019 San Diego Foundation Creative Catalyst Fellow and was a recipient of National Association of Latino Arts and Culture Border Narrative Change Grant in 2021. Please welcome Evan Apodaca.
Well, thank you everybody for showing up. I think that was the way to really make me sweat to get things started, to list things off. What I'm going to show you is sort of a culmination of material that I've been working on over the last few years, probably 4 years, and I haven't really. It's been some challenges to actually get some of the material out there for people to see it. For whatever reason, we're still finding out. But so this is kind of a special thing for me. I always get super nervous when sharing work, but this is particularly special because it's been near and dear for this many years, and not many people have really seen it. So the project that I'm presenting to you is, I've been calling it Secret City, and it's a multi-platform, multimedia series it's a body of work really that explores or critically analyzes militarism in San Diego. And that's just the basic sort of start of it. to really understand how this stuff came up, or how it sort of began to develop, we have to start with my first film, with this film, Que Lejos Estoy. It was an animated film where I explored some of my own family history, and actually sort of brought photographs, family photographs to life to do that.
Nana, I want to know about our family's past. You know, like, what makes me who I am today? How does our family's past inform my identity today?
Hace un año que hoy se cumple en este día.
If you spoke Spanish, you were in trouble. You're in school, this is America, and you speak English. They always felt like, why don't you go back to where you came from?
It's as if the past wants me to be confused about my identity.
So let's get it. Okay. So that was a very personal exploration. A lot of the photographs were animated all by hand digitally, and I, finished that process, learned a lot. And a lot of it was about memory, sort of like memory as an antagonist in a story. But obviously, like creating art is very cyclical. So I was like, okay, if I could redo this project, what would I do differently? And I thought, so I was in After Effects, I was actually moving these dots by hand, with my mouse to sort of make the images move. So this is my great grandmother, so she's making facial expressions, sort of depending on how the story is unfolding. And I thought that if I were to redo it again, that I would use facial motion capture, and I would have my interviewees, in that case, say my grandmother for that last film, I would have her be wearing this material to sort of actually, for her to reenact these stories herself, and it would be a much more like interactive process, sort of like almost bringing like an element of performance into it. So that's kind of where that project ended at, and I started experimenting with this material, just literally experimenting with really no understanding of what would come of it.
Quizás usted está preguntando qué importancia tengo yo para la historia de San Diego. Bueno, tal vez una pregunta mejor sería, ¿qué otra figura pública ampliamente reconocida podría representar a los subrepresentados de esta ciudad? En una época que este creciente número de lugares, ¿quién más sino?
Okay, so yeah, this is literally just an experiment. Wrote a quick script, and there was a friend who's known. His name is Macedonio Arteaga, and he's part of like a theater group. So I thought, okay, he'll be a great person. No, I'm not going to do that one. To sort of experiment with this new technology, and at that time, I was like, okay, well, what's the next project? And I think like sort of an aha moment for me was I was walking. I think my mom and my sister were in town. They both live in Arizona, and they were just visiting. And we were walking around. When you have visitors in San Diego, where do you go? Like Seaport Village, right? You walk a little further and you hit the Midway, USS Midway, which is a giant aircraft carrier that's actually like a tourist destination. And it just hit me at that moment. I was like, this is the most bizarre form of tourism I think I've ever seen. This very violent machinery that's massive takes up a very large portion of the horizon, and it's sort of like celebrated. And I was like, okay, this has to be a project somehow. And I live in San Diego. How could I not want to explore this giant thing? Like I can't not live in San Diego and explore the topic of militarism. That's how I was feeling. And so, let's see. I think also just, I've been in San Diego for probably like 11 or 12 years, and you sort of hear of the military as this kind of force, and perhaps even, this force is sort of like a conservatizing force here. But myself, I never truly really understood, like, what is it though? Like, okay, it's there. It's kind of this elephant in the room that I don't really understand, And so the goal was to just start exploring. And there's many aspects to militarism here. You have the bases, and there's plenty of those. You have the contractors, there's hundreds of those. You have the schools that are investing in military technology and research. It's just kind of everywhere. And okay, but there's also this tourist facade, right? And so I think that there's many things to sort of explore about it, and I wouldn't say that I've incorporated all of them into my work, but one, for example, is that let's see, in 2018, $450 million was brought to San Diego for the manufacturing of these F-35 Lightning II fighters, right? And so these are, we can literally connect the dots to what happens here, the manufacturing and the labor, to sort of the unjust wars that are happening elsewhere, right? So there's plenty of material to dig into. And the question was, okay, well, how much of our labor and manufacturing goes to other places? And San Diego loves their jobs, and especially loves the military jobs. And so it's endless, the amount of statistics. And a lot of this material is presented in sort of like it's a bolstering sort of like aspect, If we bring money here, it's more jobs, and it just kind of feeds the cycle. So this is a very stark contrast, but next was, okay, how am I going to do this? I had this experimentation, this animation, the building talking that you just saw, and how am I going to sort of bring what I want into a film using this technology, bringing these stories, or bringing sort of oral histories into play. And I gravitated towards this idea of really just inspired by what was called like tableau muralism, which there are multiple figures sort of each having their own narrative, and it's kind of like a chaos, like all happening at the same time. And sort of taking that idea and just kind of running with it. At least in one shot that you'll see.
If once American war memorials started to acknowledge their complicity as perpetrators of violence, it might sound like an alarming cacophony of voices.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it would be a mistake to not talk about the U.S. border now.
In maintaining their state-sanctioned commemorative function, we find ourselves in a city within a city, a celebratory simulation. In the carefree beach town of San Diego, California, there are countless memorials and tourist attractions which celebrate and commodify this violence, but still it's like an elephant in the room that nobody acknowledges. After dredging the city's harbor to house the nation's fleet.
Okay, we can kind of stop there. Some of these are actually even longer segments, so these are even cut down even further. At the beginning, you know, I had this idea of like this tableau, and I really a lot just had kind of myself to explore these topics, right? It's like, okay, I don't know who's gonna actually talk about these things. I could, so obviously I have myself available, but you know, I wanted to ask individuals like Margaret Thatcher, which is a sort of a neoliberal policy advocate, British Prime Minister. Well, this is a statue of her, so next was to ask others.
Defines us. Well, I don't know that it defines us, but it definitely sits on top of us. The biggest problem we have with the military economy in San Diego is the fact that it absorbs so much land mass. And that becomes a stumbling block because land is important for creating value, for creating product. If you look all around, just turn around 360 degrees, and you're going to see that over 2/3 of the area that you're looking at is military controlled. So that's a lot of land, right? Now, you think about all the jobs and the impact that has there. That land could be used for other things. It doesn't need to be military. And yet we're trained to think, well, because the military's there, there's such a huge influence, we have to keep them there. We don't. They can be replaced with other things. They can be replaced with even more importantly, native habitat for fishes to help restore our fishing industry. You could do definitely geothermal energy creation there. So you think about all the other different industries that could go there. But then, because of the dependence of the forecasters on the military, other potential, what I like to call peace economy types of businesses and industries are either ignored or they're actually explicitly rejected. And so that tells me that.
So yeah, sort of you get the gist of it, and it kind of started to become I guess like an oral history project where I'm just collecting stories, and actually this process continues today, and it hasn't stopped, and so I'm always like seeking new individuals, like who wants to be a part of this weird thing where I put a camera on their head and put dots on your face, you know. And then there are others. Let's see.
When we're walking around and maneuvering around a military city like San Diego, we very much can tell that the story that is being fixed here is a military history, right? Where if you think about it, it's commemorating, it's celebrating the military interventions as if they are battles that have been won rather than thinking of them as commemorating someone that lost something, right? Like a racialized population lost land, perhaps money, perhaps then, right, they're not being represented in this history. It's a very one-sided, very sanitized history of state violence.
I would say a lot of this kind of stuff really was about analyzing our built environment, you know, so it's how is what is reflected in our city and our surroundings, and that kind of really became a lot of my exploration, including individuals that speak to sort of like early 20th century development of the military being like a place of geopolitical strategy in terms of like accessing the Pacific as well as accessing Latin America, being, you know, just the most southwest city in the US, serving as that purpose. And so we don't have to watch everything, but in terms of these animations, I'll end on this one.
It's sort of a hidden history, it's a hidden aspect of San Diego. When people think of the city, they think of the perfect sun, they think of going to the beach, they think of getting a tan here. But what doesn't immediately come to mind is the heavy presence of the military and how that influences society. And more specific to the immigration and borderlands experience is the presence of large paramilitary force such as the Border Patrol. And the normalization of violence is part of, is one of the factors of what is known as low intensity conflict theory, where violence becomes so normalized that people stop questioning it. It becomes part of their daily routines. The militarization, I think, of our communities has really taken shape from the formation of policy around wars.
So yeah, we're gonna stop there. But you know, so there's an attempt to kind of incorporate and synthesize analyses of violence at the border with the other branches of the military, and sort of like synthesizing these two things together. At around the time of the beginning of the pandemic, you know, I had already started some of these, and I thought, okay, if this project is to continue, I don't know how the pandemic's gonna affect everything. So I was like, I'm gonna just start mailing my equipment to people and sort of conduct the process with them over Zoom, and still sort of get the same product, you know. But I have to sort of instruct them on all of this, and so I started doing it. People will get their friends or family to sort of help them put these dots on their face. This person in particular was who was in the Navy, 1969, sort of the beginning, or in San Diego, the beginnings of what people call like sort of like the GI movement, in terms of like an anti-war sort of like leanings within the military at the time when there was a draft. And so also at a time when civil rights sort of mentality was kind of combining with anti-war sentiment. So people were sort of, you know, there's racism in the military, and so people were speaking out against that as well as against the war in Vietnam. And I'm gonna show you material that I haven't created, but because the process of finding things is such like about patience, and it's such a strenuous process of literally finding material that didn't exist in terms of in the public. Like locating it has become sort of like a treasure. And so in San Diego specifically, there were, in many other cities, there was, and this is at a time when people were printing things much more than now. And but in San Diego, there was people like that guy that I interviewed within the Navy that were producing radical literature and disseminating it into the various branches, the Marines, Navy, and so on. And really risking a lot, and I just found that to be really, really fascinating, and a lot of it I wouldn't have expected to find from these individuals, and just really shined a lot of light on this moment and different events that happened. In this case, this was literally sort of what would you call it? Like this was an attempt to stop an aircraft carrier from leaving the harbor of San Diego to go back to Vietnam at sort of the height of the war. And there's just like, and it was, I started seeing that San Diego had an extremely rich history of anti-imperialist sentiment, more than I ever expected, given we're the most militarized metropolitan region in the U.S. You wouldn't expect such sentiment to be here, but what it actually showed was that the amount of sort of like military installations that were here sort of provided like an opportunity for people to respond, and so it's sort of like is cyclical in that way, if that makes sense. And I learned of a particular group called the Movement for a Democratic Military, and they were a very interesting group because they focused, they really brought this idea of like guerrilla militarism, like more like people's armies, within people that were drafted into the Marines, into the Navy. They were sort of like, we want to have our own autonomy, in this sort of leftist like way of thinking. And the Movement for a Democratic Military, there were two. There's one in San Diego and there's one in Oceanside. The one in Oceanside particularly was, it evolved, but towards the end of their existence, focused on sort of recruiting Black Marines that were up on Camp Pendleton, and created a giant movement in Oceanside. And they were talking about, sort of civil rights within the military, but also sort of combined with this anti-war sentiment. And Black Unity was sort of like an offshoot of MDM, sort of after the group had dissipated. And so also just to show like the process of finding these individuals. So there's been multiple occasions now where I'll just somehow get someone's address, show up to their house unannounced, and be like, hey, do you want to be interviewed? And sometimes people are aggressive, sometimes they're really nice. In this case, this was an individual that photographed a lot of demonstrations. Wait, did I miss something? I think I missed something. Maybe we don't have to show that. So yeah, just finding this material. I think there's sort of like a sort of like the artwork is the process of research as well. So these were images that were taken by the UT. This is Oceanside, May 1970. So on the left you have individuals that are part of MDM. On the right you have sort of like the counter demonstrators where their car says "Better Dead Than Red," which is like anti-communist message. And they also collaborated somewhat with the Black Panthers and really kind of had that approach to how they organized. And let's see, so this was, once I started learning about this, finding these images, I went out and found some of these individuals. I haven't found everybody, but located some of these individuals and actually found the house that they organized in Oceanside, pretty central in Oceanside. And their story is pretty dramatic, almost in the sense that many radical groups at this moment in time, a lot of what they experienced was very similar to other cities or radical groups in other cities. And this house in particular was called the Green Machine, and it was a space for Black Marines, white civilians who were organizing together and producing literature, and at a certain point were threatening enough just by what they were putting out, and that they were harassed and eventually shot into. Their house was shot into, and so this image on the right is from a microfilm at the Oceanside Library, and happened to have that date, found this image, and also found the address at the same time, and noticed that there were the holes, at least the patches of the holes were still there, you know, in the same way that the image shows. And so one of the images one of the individuals that was wounded, his name is Jesse Woodard. But the next step was, I started realizing that those animations I was doing wasn't necessarily the right approach to these stories, which these are very personal stories that, in the way that the statue animations are kind of like comedic, they're just kind of naturally comedic, and I didn't really feel like it was an appropriate way to present these other dramatic stories that were experienced firsthand by individuals. I couldn't see these stories matching up with those kinds of images, and so the idea was to bring these individuals to the places where some of these events happened. We went to downtown Oceanside where this demonstration was. We've gone to places where they would leaflet and ask them to sort of retrace their steps. What happened here? Show me, like literally almost perform it for me, And so that's kind of what we started doing. And this is, and also just to point out, there's some individuals that have helped me in some of this process, including Rafa Rios, Marco, Omar. These are people that have also helped me shoot. I'm used to doing things all by myself, actually, and so it was really awesome to have people helping me for like the first time ever doing some of these kinds of shoots, because I started learning I can't manage the audio, the camera, and talk to people at the same time. So these are kind of reconstructions of some of these events.
So on the night of the shooting, so you think you were sitting in this room? I mean, in this area?
I was sitting in front of a window, and there was like this raggedy old.
Yeah, it was way over here.
Yeah, with my back to the window.
Right. And then everybody was sitting around in a circle. Oh, it's like many guys. And I was sitting here, like back against this wall.
Yeah.
I'm like this. Now, when did you leave?
I left a little before the meeting was over, and I think some people stood up because they needed to ride back to the base. And I was leaving, I had this weird feeling because there was a cop car in each corner. There was like 4 of them.
When you saw them when you came out of the house?
Yes, I did. And I drove that way and then onto what was Hill Street at the time to take them back to the gate. And I just felt like, why are there, is there going to be a raid?
Right, and of course, and I mean, but that's where our answer is.
Yeah.
That is that things had gotten so tense that you know, a raid, you would have expected a raid or something like that. Right? And so you left, meeting was over. Jesse stood up and a bunch of other guys stood up. And I looked over where you had been sitting in that area. And all of a sudden, the blinds was like exploding. It was like sparks flying off the blinds. I didn't hear anything. And then I heard the submachine gun. Pop, 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 pop. And it went all the way across the front. All the glasses and windows exploded in. And Jesse was on the floor about 10 feet in front of me, saying, I'm hit. And I said, somebody call 911. And I went like this, and I crawled, because I didn't know whether there were going to be more shots. I crawled all the way back to my room, got my shotgun out of the closet, and came back, putting a shell or 2 with my shotgun. I was low, and I went outside, and the street was completely silent. There was nothing inside. People were calling the ambulance, dealing with Jesse. There was kind of chaos going on in here. And outside, absence. That was the shooting. After that, the place became a fortress.
Did you think, because you saw the police outside, that is who had been shot?
I did. I totally thought the police did it. They were there. I mean, they were in each corner. And I thought, if it happened just as they left, what were they hanging around corners for? The 4 corners. And I just assumed that they were just waiting for the time to do it. And I assumed they were waiting for me to leave with a group of guys. Again, because I was in high school still, and they didn't want to include me in their carnage, I guess. I had a weird feeling about them being on the corners. Something bad was happening. And I thought, well, maybe just the rain, maybe they'll try to get us into the guys. May have been illegal, I don't know. But I never thought of that. I used to have dreams about some of these atrocities and feeling so powerless to do anything about it. Then I made up come here with the guys and say, maybe we can do something about it instead of just screaming in the streets.
So yeah, let's see. So yeah, just a totally different approach to investigating stories of not only just militarism in San Diego, but what have been people's responses, and what has been the aftermath, and what happened to this movement, and where did it go, you know? And so these are the stories of these individuals who experienced this, and we're kind of like allowing them to experience or re-experience and sort of almost like a form of therapy in a way, where we go to these sites and do it like that. So yeah, I think let's see. So no one knows exactly who shot into that house, but I've been exploring various sort of contingents of the anti-war movement in San Diego, and discovered a group called the Secret Army Organization, who was kind of like an offshoot at that time of the Minutemen. And this document in particular came from Freedom of Information Act request that I submitted to the FBI, and they actually sent me a series of CDs. Well, I didn't have a CD player, but nonetheless, we got these documents, and this was a bulletin that they put out for leftists at that time that they were targeting. And so in Ocean Beach, there was a house that was there was one SDSU economics professor living there. And he was very vocal at that time, and they were targeting him. So his name is marked out, but I know who it is that they're talking about. And so, so the next goal was to find individuals from the SAO. These are individuals that were photographed by someone who was a photographer for a radical paper called The Door. I think it probably ended in mid-70s, late 70s. And he made an effort at that time to photograph informants that were at demonstrations, or maybe not informants, but people that were plain clothes, and obviously like photographing with really long lenses, so you could kind of tell what they were up to. This guy on the right, his name is Howard Barry Godfrey, still living, and he was an FBI informant who sort of initiated the Secret Army Organization, and was sort of like agitating individuals, getting them to commit some of these crimes, shooting into movement houses. I know that people from MDM also assumed that it was the SAO that did it, because there was so much sort of like stress about them at that time. And so all of the photographs of Howard Barry Godfrey, he's covering his face. So that was just kind of an interesting feature. Let's see. Oh, I missed something. And again, this is not material that I've edited, but again, just like kind of like the richness of archive and finding these stories has been kind of remarkable for me. So this was the house in Ocean Beach.
Paula, what were you doing at the time that you were shot?
I just put my jacket on and I was getting some money out of my purse to go to the store to get some cigarettes.
Were you facing the window or facing away from it?
I was facing the window.
Were the drapes closed or open?
They were closed.
So the person shooting perhaps saw only a shadow.
Right, they couldn't have known who they were shooting at. It was just a shadow through the drapes.
Did you hear a shot?
Not really. I heard the window break and then felt a pain in my arm, and that was about it.
What happened immediately afterwards?
Well, one of the women in the house said to turn the lights off, and we all hit the ground, and she took care of me by putting bandages on my arm and stuff.
What have the doctors said about your arm?
Well, from what I understand, the bullet lodged in the elbow. They removed it last night in surgery. One corner of the elbow was shattered, and it's broken pretty badly. I'll end up being like this for a couple of days and then interaction for a week or two. And while it's interaction, I can exercise it to regain as much mobility as possible, but I will lose some of the use of my arm.
Do you have any idea who might be wanting to harm the people in the Ocean Beach house where you live?
We have a pretty good idea. We've received some phone calls and a letter and a sticker on our door last night from an organization called the Secret Army Organization. We don't know exactly who they are, but we've turned all that information over to the police, and they're saying that they'll leave no stone unturned to find out.
Do you have any idea what the Secret Army Organization consists of?
Not for sure. We have heard that they are an armed group of right-wing veterans, but nobody as yet knows who they are exactly.
On December
So this was the individual that they were targeting, was the economics professor at SSU, Peter Ballmer. So yeah, the stories that once I've found individuals, it just kind of snowballs and continues from there. And some folks are still around, some folks are deceased. But I was able to find one of the SAO members when he would first talk to me on the phone was extremely aggressive. But he had also been turned in by the FBI informant, so he had sort of some justice to fill for him, achieve for himself. And so I just kind of kept listening to his interactions on the phone, and he agreed to be interviewed, which I won't show you today, but just to sort of like show you where the story is headed, so to speak. And he was turned in for bombing at a theater, which if you're ever on 5th Avenue in Hillcrest, across from Buffalo Exchange is a place called Breakfast Bitch. That was the Guild Theater which he bombed. It was a pornographic theater. For whatever reason, these individuals had like crazy ideas, and so kind of to conclude, there's sort of this very strange form of animation. There's these sort of reenactments, but through all of this, I've gathered terabytes of archival material, gone to different places, scanned things, all related to this history of militarism and anti-imperialist sentiment and organizing in that sense. And you just kind of come across material that sort of like speaks to the region. I think this is probably from the 40s, and I don't think that it had a date on it, but that's just my best judgment. But so out of this, I'm like, okay, not every interesting story can be a film. But sort of like approaching archive as a documentary filmmaker, sort of presenting the archive in a different way. So this is a story that it was a labor strike in the shipyards here, where it was the Navy that the laborers had to respond to as opposed to like their direct boss, right? And this is 1941, and it kind of, to me, spoke to the monopoly of the industry, that the industry has on labor and the economy here, more broadly speaking, probably even more so in the 40s, given World War II. I think, so this is a cyanotype print on stucco, and so it's a material that is meant to be outdoors, so this is a piece that I will intend to install outside and sort of presenting some of these stories. And this is actually one of 4 that headline is kind of like one of, maybe it's the second in terms of chronological order of the 4 pieces. And I think it's about sort of like the amount of material that, sort of like the psychosis of repetition that we experience in society, and also what doesn't get repeated, what doesn't get retold. And thinking of the archive as like refuse, as trash, and this image kind of attempting to start to create, sort of treat it as trash, while still telling some of the story. So it's large enough, you know, it's like probably about this tall, about this wide, and so you can actually go up and read the material. And so yeah, I think this is, so what I've shown you is basically like chronologically what I've created from the beginning to the end. This is like the last completed piece of this entire like exploration. And so I think that concludes everything. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. So I think, you know, some of this material it's not necessarily like inspiring, you know, it's kind of heavy. It can be heavy, and I think it's a topic not often explored. That's for sure. It's a topic that not everybody wants to talk about, especially in San Diego. But in the case that, you know, this, I'm kind of bringing this stuff to the table, I think if y'all want to speak anything that's on your mind, if you don't have to ask questions, but if there's sort of like a dialogue, that would be amazing. You don't have to sort of like come to me as like the know-all of this material, but I know that for sure there's individuals in that room that also have charged opinions, and so if we want to go about it that way, but also if you have questions, feel free to ask away. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, having the piece where the guy is interviewing the girl that's in the bed.
Yes.
Who's doing that interview? Who's that guy, and
Yes.
what's he doing it for?
I should have explained that. So, so Tom Hurwitz, he was one of the main organizers of MDM, which was really like largely a multiracial group. Teresa Cerda, she was at that time 16 years old, still in high school, and she was, her role was actually recruitment. So she was recruiting Marines, handing out flyers in downtown Oceanside, recruiting Marines to become involved in MDM. So Tom actually is a cinematographer, and he had a very specific way of conducting some of this material himself, where it was almost like he was directing, but you know, because they experienced that moment together, you know, they sort of had a dialogue, and okay, you experienced this, oh, okay, I thought it was that. And so he wasn't necessarily interviewing, but he was one of the people that was a major part of that group. And so I think I included one of my questions in there to kind of show that there, you know, maybe it doesn't show that, but you know, I was asking them questions and egging them on along the way, but yeah, he was very sort of forward in how we interacted with him too. Sometimes frustrating, but yeah. Omar.
I think he meant the redhead gal, right? The archival footage?
Well, there was a girl that was like lying in bed.
Oh, that one. Okay, so yeah. So there was a house on Muir Street in Ocean Beach that Peter Bomer, the professor from SCSU, lived in, was being targeted by the Secret Army organization, and they shot into their house in an attempt to shoot him, but wounded Paula Tharp, who was a member of that group, and they were all actually a member of a group that was sort of like organizing against the Republican convention coming to San Diego in 1972, which actually did not end up coming here. I think it went to Florida. But they were organizing in that house, and Paula, I think, died not too long after that, and people do say that, just from the individuals I've spoken to that were at that house, that she never fully recovered from that shooting. And yeah, there's other emotions there too.
Who's the guy who's asking her the question?
So that was Howard Keene, I believe, who at that time was a reporter on CBS, or at least their affiliate now. But he was kind of known, and everyone that I've spoken to from that era, from these groups, mentioned him because he was not like a lot of the conservative journalism that was happening at that time. I mean, we can compare it now to them, but he was kind of like useful and to a lot of these folks who were experiencing these things in a way that other news sources were not, you know. Go for it, Roberto.
Thanks for your talk. I know earlier, in the early part, you mentioned the links between militarism in San Diego in general, and then militarism with the border. And I know that was on the earlier part, but in terms of this latter part on MDM, secret army, organization, and so on, I'm wondering if in the anti-war activism or anti-militarism activism of the time in the 70s, if you found any points of intersection with folks organizing against the Vietnam War, and also kind of highlighting issues around border enforcement as a form of militarism. Even though I know that militarism in the border doesn't happen until more like after 78, but were some of those folks of MDM and the like attentive to border issues?
Honestly, I can't say that I found anything that shows that. I mean, that's not to say there wasn't, but yeah, I can't say that I've seen that. I think an interesting thing that was in one of these images was this little piece here about the Chicano moratorium, which was the San Diego Chicano moratorium, which actually happened before the LA one. I think this particular is June 6th. Do you know when was the LA? August? So yeah, it's just kind of an interesting, it was definitely much smaller than the LA one, but just kind of shows what was going on at that time, and I think sort of, you know, it's not about putting San Diego on the map, so to speak, but also, you know, we think of San Diego as this conservative town, which, you know, it has that, but there's a lot more under there if you start to dig, you know. Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. That's a tremendous amount of research, and yeah, it's just really inspiring work. I was wondering about the statues. I agree with you. I think they're like just naturally funny when you put it on the side and all. But I was wondering, you know, rather than narrativizing it, like giving them things to say, why not embody the person and have them making fun of themselves openly? Like if it's the Balboa Park statue and the horse, and just, you know, like having them clown themselves. Or is there like a legal reason not to do that? Or have you thought of that? Or just curious?
Like scripting people?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? I mean, I started scripting people at the beginning. Scripting, I mean, myself, I would write material and present and do it myself, you know, perform it. But I, you know, I would be asking actors to do that, you know, which I started to in early experiments. But you know, for me, this has been about collectively telling a story, so interpreting true life, real life, from individuals around us, And so, yeah, I mean, there's definitely that urge to do sort of, and that would be fiction, you know. But this is essentially nonfiction using sort of fictional methods, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I got two questions, but first, the last piece is really nice. I really like it.
Oh, thanks.
The idea of history being wasted as opposed to disappearing, fading, or being erased.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's almost like it's useful. Maybe we can use it, but we're wasting it, right?
Mm.
I like that. And my question is what was your thought process with the statues being broken and on the ground? And then my second question is if you know anything more about the militias that were forming within the government or trying to. I think you said something about that, like, yeah, like within the maybe federal military, there was maybe smaller factions that were trying to form.
So you're talking about MDM?
Yeah, I think it was MDM or the one after that.
Secret Army Organization?
No, not them.
Okay. Yeah,
Maybe
I mean,
I'm wrong.
what's that?
Maybe I misunderstood on that one.
Okay. Yeah, I'd have to know which one you're talking about, but I mean, Secret Army Organization was kind of like a very, I mean, I talked to the judge that actually like ruled on these individuals before they went to prison, you know, and because they were all turned in by the FBI informant, but they did take sort of like a militant approach to what they were doing.
They're the right-wing militia.
The right-wing militia, yeah, exactly. MDM is individuals that were drafted into the military that were sort of thinking like people's army in their heads. This idea of a democratic military was probably like, you know, they were young, sort of thinking idealistically, but you're kind of like, what does a democratic military look like? But, you know, that's kind of where their heads were at that time. They were sort of stuck in the military, experiencing these crazy things, but were disseminating leftist thinking into the bases, you know.
And
Anti-war sentiment, yeah. Yeah. But in terms of the statues being broken, I think, so I started this in 2016, pretty much after I had finished my first film that I showed you at the very beginning. And, you know, I started doing these statues actually just upright, and started just kind of like showing people, hey, what do you think about this? And just getting like a very broad sort of like, what do you think? And, you know, it was weird because people were like, why should I listen to these? Why should I listen to, I don't, you know, it was weird. Like, I thought I was giving like an interesting story, an interesting approach to history, you know, presenting history, sort of defacing these statues and leaving them upright. And so I was just like, I think they need like sort of like a little push to allow people to see before they even start watching it. There's something there. And so I think it was 2016. There was a lot of initiatives of bringing down colonial statues on the East Coast, right? And I was just kind of like thinking about that, you know, sort of as a way to bring stories that these colonial or imperialist statues wouldn't say, and imbuing them with stories that I felt like they should say, and that's my act of defacing. But to a lot of the individuals I was showing, for whatever reason, it wasn't enough, so I was like, okay, just give it something so maybe after an event happened, this is now what they'd be saying, if that makes sense. After they had been toppled, then this new story comes out, if that makes sense. So, any more questions? Marco?
What's your ultimate vision? Like, is this going to be like an ongoing series and just keep adding on elements to it, or
yeah,
or how do you see, like, at least like as far as presentation, how do you see it?
Yeah, so the monuments, that's like ongoing, less like focused on it, but it's kind of like when something comes up, I meet someone that I would like to incorporate into it, I'll do that one. But currently, I have never directed a feature film, and so there's sort of two stories. So the Secret Army organization story and the individuals that sort of experience their harassment and violence within the anti-war movement. It's kind of about that's what this feature film is about. So after interviewing one of the individuals who was allegedly part of the Secret Army organization, the story started to sort of unfold, and finding this archive of Paula Tharp, who was shot by the Secret Army organization. It's just like, the story is just getting bigger, and it cannot exist as a feature film, so that's one sort of like hump. And then there finds archival that can't necessarily be a film. Okay, I'm interested in it enough, I'm interested in the story, it's a print series. And so it's basically just this giant body of work, like terabytes of archives, the pieces that I'm creating. When I was doing the monuments at the very beginning, they were supposed to be installations, and they're actually supposed to be sort of two screens. So the archival would be on one side, or the images of San Diego would be on one side, and the ongoing statue animation would be on the other. And it would kind of sort of present this duality, of San Diego, and also thinking of how to present it. That's what I was intending, an installation. Pandemic hit, I was like, I need to get some of this stuff out there, so I'm gonna make it easy to just see on one screen on the internet if need be. And so I just kind of started putting the two screens together in one. And so it's been challenging to get people to want to show this stuff, but it's just kind of like whoever, who's finding it looking until it happens, I would say some of this material is easier to see theatrically, like in the MGM house, like that plays theatrically, right? It's not like a piece that you sit and sort of contemplate about in sort of like an art installation setting, and it has a story arc, right? So it just plays completely different. So that would be shown in theaters, in a much different way than like this stuff, I would say. There's been no luck like getting these accepted into film festivals, like really at all, zero. So it's just kind of like the nature of them, and seeing like, that's been my learning process when I made my first film, like who's interested in just trying out all the different avenues and seeing where it lands, and that's where it lives, that's where it lives in its best form. And so that's kind of likely the process of all of this work as well, So, yes.
I thought it was kind of interesting when you used the inspiration at the beginning to talk about the Midway sitting there, and with the group of Veterans for Peace, and I don't know if you've talked to any of those folks, but they've used Veterans Day, Armistice Day as a stage. We used to do this Arlington West reading of people that were killed in Iraq and the recent conflicts. And I don't know if that fits into kind of where you're going with this film to kind of bring home, because the whole issue for them is about the cost of militarization in the country as a whole. And so your theme is this is a part of San Diego that it's a reality. It's a huge reality. It's almost like something we just take for granted, so to speak. And really kind of trying to bring something forward about that, more consciousness to just that reality that we live in. So I don't know if
Yeah, I have approached Veterans for Peace thanks to Jack, who's here, who actually introduced me to them. And yeah, I've actually interviewed a couple of members from them. And yeah, I just kind of like, analyses. That's been the process, like collecting analyses of San Diego. I think it's really important to focus like locally here. It's where we have access to. It's where we can act. More easily, and it's proven to be in the past fruitful in that sense. And so that's been. I've thought of expanding this project to different places. Maybe that might happen, but for now I think it's really important to focus on San Diego. I'm here, and it is in the state that it's in, and I think it's kind of, I would say, under like sort of the core dream or goal is to inspire like a broad critique of imperialism, but locally, and so it's been nice to meet different organizations like Veterans for Peace, and we think of the anti-war movement as like, oh, the war ended, the movement ended, but that's not the case, right? I mean, there are people still here from that era, and there are other also anti-imperialist groups still around here, but also younger folks. Anakbayam, Palestinian Youth Movement, so those critiques still exist, and it's alive and say a different way, but it's still there. Okay.
Yeah, well, because I was actually going to ask him before he raised his hand, like if you thought about or intended on pursuing and incorporating like connections to the modern manifestation of the modern state or of the anti-war movement in San Diego. If you found anything that you can make connections with and put with your film.
Yeah, I think there has been some connections and some interviews with some like current day groups that are doing work today, and that are newer groups than say groups that existed 50 years ago in San Diego at least. And I think the process is ongoing, so I will continue to collect like when an avenue with the connection happens, and I think it's valuable to like broadening the analysis, then for sure, it will continue to be added to. It was one thing I forgot, but yes.
What will you do with those printed tableaux? Those are like tombstones. You're gonna post them around the city, or are they gonna be on exhibit in the museum, or what's the end goal for those?
So it's kind of, I've gone the route of like asking permission, who's interested, but now I'm kind of just like, where is there space that I can just put it up guerrilla style, like wherever I want kind of thing, in sort of a permanent way. The goal is for them to live outside, and that's why they're on stucco. And we have tons of stucco around here, so it's kind of like adding to that built environment in that way. And so at one point or another, that series will hopefully like exist in public spaces, but the location is yet to be determined.
How many have you made so far?
I've done a lot of small experiments, but that is the first like large version of this process. And so now that I've got that one down, there's 3 more to go, at least in this series. But there'll probably be more as well, because there's tons of material that I've come across that can be part of that series as well.
It's kind of cool in the sense that you've made, I don't know, in kind of like the contemporary world, you're going from present to the past. You're connecting the virtual to kind of tangible like things that you can kind of touch. And it's kind of this collection of a history that, I grew up in San Diego. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know about half of this whole thing. So I think even just like this notion that the city can actually be a place that both virtually as information can go everywhere, but also physically I can see those pieces throughout the whole city itself, just being literally like you're learning as you're walking down the street, seeing these images.
Totally, yeah, I like that, yeah. And it's called Secret City, and so it's kind of playing on that, you know, these stories can exist in public places you might not know, but until they're there, you know, it's a secret, you know. Thank you guys.
Thanks, man.
Oh, go for it.